Hi, I'm Peter J. Ray. Welcome. Today's topic is Resalest Remarkable Books, number 75. The first book today is Citizens, A Chronicle of the French Revolution by Simone Schama, 1989. This book has 875 pages. Wow, what a horrible book, although well written. It's about the French Revolution, one of the most I find one of the most difficult topics to discuss, to examine. Yeah, very troubling. It's a very troubling thing from history, and terrible, pathetic, sad, tragic, cruel. This book is about France during the 5-year period from 1789 to 1794. There's the fall of the Bastille prison, which was considered, I guess you could say, the beginning of the revolution. Different characters. Charlotte Corday, I believe she murdered. She was this woman who murdered one of the characters. Danton, who was a famous thinker. The Estates General, which was a meeting of the different classes. The Girondins were a political faction. The Jacobins, who were the leftists. Lafayette, the Marquis de Lafayette, who was a part of the American Revolution. King Louis XVI, Queen Marie Antoinette, the king and queen who had their heads cut off by the guillotine. Jean-Paul Marat, I believe, he was murdered. There's a famous painting of him. He was a major player. Mirabeau, Paris, France, of course, the center of all this, the activity. The guillotine, all the people whose lives were lost. Maximilien Robespierre, probably considered the most evil man of that episode. The sans-culottes, those were people who literally so poor they didn't have men who didn't have pants, or very raggedy pants. The tennis court oath, Versailles, which was this famous palace for the king. Voltaire, one of the great thinkers. Plenty of turmoil, high ideals, low actions, brutality, hypocrisy. One big mess. Yeah, so it's, the only way I can understand the French Revolution is that there was there's a lot of suffering in the world, and there's resentment, a lot of suffering among the poor, physical suffering and resentment. And in France, they had this hierarchical system where the king and queen and the nobility were basically living had all this luxury and were pretty lazy and not really, serving the country. And then a lot of people who were very poor, working very hard, and who were hungry and poverty-stricken. So there's this resentment. And in the French Revolution, I think a big part of it was sort of the anger of the poor, And so they were happy when every time people were getting their heads, different people were considered enemies of France, having their heads cut off. These high ideals all sounded good at the beginning. And in fact, it was connected to the American Revolution, which happened, which had broken out only a few years before in 1776. So this is, about 10 years later. And these high ideals from the French Revolution, liberty, equality, fraternity, it all sounded good, especially at the beginning. They thought, there was a lot of hopes that the French would, have a good government, and, the kings and the whole system of kings and queens had to go because the kings were arbitrary, and you never know what they were going to do. And you might have a good king, and then his son would be no good. Although it's interesting, people today, I've met some people today who are promoting monarchy again. They say, in a democracy, the politicians, they're stealing money. They don't really care about the country. But with a king, the king, his son will inherit, so he wants the country to be in good shape. So there are people today promoting monarchy, the virtues of kings and queens. Anyway, and the thing is, the French Revolution, I think their big mistake was they became atheist. We all know that there have been problems with Christianity and the Catholic Church, and Christians really not being Christian, a lot of cruelty, and also among the priests and bishops and cardinals and popes who were not, really not living Christian lifestyles. But anyway, but the big mistake is they decided to eliminate Christianity. They thought, we have these problems with corrupt Christian leaders, so we're going to and we're going to eliminate Christianity, which they attempted to do. And this, see, to me, this was the big mistake. And regardless of how Christian leaders have behaved, still the message of Jesus Christ has always been there, and it has had a positive effect, even if Christian leaders have not been Christian. But the message has always been there. And it's a very high ideal that we should love God and love each other. But if you take that away, well, we're all in big trouble, I think. If you take away the idea of a loving God who cares about us, that we should love God and love each other. So anyway, they did that, and then they got crazy, and then they were just killing, just random killing of people, and it became horrible. It became an absolute nightmare. People were very, very troubled by it, especially the early supporters. When I was in French class growing up, my name is Peter, so in French it's Pierre, and I had a classmate who was also Peter, so the teacher didn't want two Pierres, so she said, one of you can either be Jean-Pierre or you can pick a name. I ended up picking Maurice, but later after I did all this different historical research, I came across Robespierre, and I thought I should have said, I'll be Robespierre. That would have been funny to see the expression on her face, because French teachers know French history. They know who Robespierre was, and they also know how terrible he was. So another interesting thing is, the French Revolution, even though it was pretty terrible for France, it had a positive effect on the world, because before it broke out, and people in Europe and around the world had ideas, that of acceptance of injustice, that we have these kings and queens are no good, but what are you going to do? This is life, and a lot of the poor people kind of felt like, well, this is our lot in life, just to work and suffer and be powerless. And so these ideals that everyone was equal and that everyone deserved equal treatment before the law, this was very important in changing thinking, and sort of inspiring people to want democratic government, and government that was accountable to the people, government that needed to serve the people. Interesting thing is that the ideals of the French Revolution, because the French went on started trying to conquer all of Europe, and they did actually, and then including Spain, and they brought these ideals wherever they went. Although the conquest was not very democratic, but the ideals changed the thinking of other peoples in Europe to become more democratic and believe that everyone should have equal rights before the law. And this happened in Spain, and as a result, Spain at that time had their big empire, including the Philippines. And so the whole idea that government should do a good job and not just enjoy power and wealth, and the government should serve the people. So it was decided that in Spain that the Philippines, which was a colony of Spain, Filipinos should be treated better. So they sent a governor to the Philippines with the idea that yes, he should be a good guy and see what he could do to make life better for the Filipino people. And so Filipinos were very happy about that, because they'd been used to these lousy governors and Spanish rule, which had been very cruel, and the Spanish were very lazy and abusive. And now you had a guy he was a good guy, and they thought, they were happy. And then later, things changed, and there was a reaction, and the Spanish decided to go back to the old ways, and then they sent another mean governor to the Philippines, and Filipinos were upset, like, oh, wow, what's going on? So actually, that good governor and the ideals of the French Revolution inspired Filipinos to fight for independence, because they thought, wow, we deserve better. We don't deserve just to be forever, like slaves of the Spanish. So it did inspire the Philippine Revolution, Filipinos to fight for independence, which they did, and eventually, of course, the U.S. came to the Philippines, but the Spanish rule came to an end. So this is another interesting story. I was student teaching when I was reading this book, and I was reading it during lunch break, and the teacher came into the cafeteria. I was a substitute teacher in North Ridgeville, Ohio, and she goes, "Oh, what are you reading?" And I held up the book, and she said, "Ah!" It was funny. She thought it was about the French Revolution, which is a very, very controversial topic, very troubling, very interesting, and crazy. So I really recommend it, and a lot of different characters. So this is really something, really an important part of world history. And this is a tremendous book, a history book about the French Revolution. The next book is Africa's World War, Congo, The Rwandan Genocide and the Making of a Continental Catastrophe by Gerard Prunier, 2009. This book has 364 pages. Wow, what a book. Really complicated. The author did a lot of work. In 1994, the ethnic Hutu-led government of Rwanda in East Africa organized the murder of 600,000 ethnic Tutsis in Rwanda. 2 years later, the Tutsis took power in Rwanda, and 2 million Hutus, ethnic Hutus, fled to Zaire, which is now the Congo, then led by the dictator Joseph Mobutu. Mobutu was ousted in Zaire, and Laurent Kabila took power. From 1998 to 2001, a world war in Central Africa ensued. Kind of an unknown thing. 4 million Africans died. Uganda, Zimbabwe, Angola, Burundi, and other countries were involved. Big part was the Hutu-Tutsi War, which was ongoing. Also, other tribal ethnic conflict, various armies killing, looting, raping, fighting over mineral wealth. Very complicated. Enormous suffering. Refugees, starvation, death from disease, exposure, lack of security for agriculture. They couldn't cultivate crops because it wasn't safe, so that led to food shortages. Zaire was renamed Congo. After the death of Laurent Kabila, his son Joseph took power, and there was improvement. Rwandan imperialism in Congo. Western guilt for the Tutsi genocide. Yeah, this was during Bill Clinton's was U.S. president, and people thought, oh my God, this is a modern genocide, a recent genocide back in that's 24 years ago, and then I think this is amazing. This author, because this is something that was the research that he did for this book must have been extremely difficult to do. Because there were so many different private armies that were created. There was so much chaos, and trying to organize it, figure out what's going on was very tough. And I give him a lot of credit. This story is not very well known, although actually there have been a lot of recent refugees here in the U.S. because of this horrific African World War in Central Africa. Very interesting. So many different private armies and organizations, and so it's pretty confusing, but the author did a good job of trying to figure it out, and it's good to know, what's going on in the world. Africa is definitely a neglected continent, and this book sheds light on an extremely important time in the history of Africa, and so many people, millions of people were affected by it, and really very, very tragic, very interesting, and it's something very good to know. The next book is Crazy '08, How a Cast of Cranks, Rogues, Boneheads, and Magnates Created the Greatest Year in Baseball History by Kate Murphy, 2007. This book is about the 1908 baseball season, World Series champions Chicago Cubs. I read the book because the 2016 baseball playoffs were starting, and I wanted to pay respect to the 1908 Chicago Cubs. We actually just filmed a video yesterday about the 1908 Cleveland Naps. The famous double play combination, Tinkers to Evers to Chance, the greatest double play combination. John McGraw, manager of the New York Giants, Ty Cobb of the Tigers, Christy Mathewson, Napoleon Lajoie in Cleveland, also Addie Joss in Cleveland, Fred Merkel's blunder. He didn't touch second base on a National League title-winning hit, depriving the Giants of glory. Kate Murphy, the author, wrote a fine book, and anyway, I really enjoyed this. The next book is The Bronx is Burning, 1977, Baseball Politics and the Battle for the Soul of a City by Jonathan Mahler, 2005. This is a tremendous book. It's about New York City in 1977. Very troubled city, financially and socially. Lots of crime and white flight, European Americans leaving. The mayoral race, Abe Beame, Ed Koch, Bella Abzug, Mario Cuomo, those four contenders. Black loot, looting and chaos. The Yankees winning the World Series under the ownership of George Steinbrenner, manager Billy Martin, slugger Reggie Jackson, catcher Thurman Munson. Then the son of Sam Killer. There was this guy who was a serial killer. A lot going on in New York City in 1977. All right, a lot of very. It was a troubled city, and this is a very fine book about New York City in 1977. The next book is Hank Aaron and the Home Run That Changed America by Tom Stanton, 2004. This is a wonderful book, very interesting, and the book chronicles Hank Aaron's pursuit of Babe Ruth's career home run record of 714 home runs in 1973 and 1974. Aaron finished in the 1973 season one home run short. He had 713 home runs. On opening day in Cincinnati in 1974, he hit number 714, which tied Babe Ruth. And then he hit 715, which broke the record. He received death threats, hate letters, and racial abuse from Braves fans. Very sad, and very low attendance at home games. He also received many positive, encouraging letters, mostly from children, and big crowds on the road. Teammates Ralph Garr, Dusty Baker, Willie Mays, was another player in the league. Eddie Matthews, Bowie Kuhn, the commissioner, Davy Johnson, the second baseman. The life of Jackie Robinson inspired him. God bless Hank Aaron. So this was a great step in the evolution, for African Americans, for equality, and it was tough. Babe Ruth was this tremendous, this great American hero, and then he was European American, and Hank Aaron was African American. So it was, then there were racists. Yeah, he in fact when he got all these death threats like that, if he broke the record, somebody's going to kill him. In fact, after he broke the record, his mom ran out on the field and hugged him. And she imagined someone would shoot and kill him, and she wanted to try to stop the bullet. So this is a good book about civil rights and a very good American history. The next book is Francona: The Red Sox Years by Terry Francona and Dan Shaughnessy, 2013. Very nice book. The story of Terry Francona's 8 years as Boston Red Sox manager from 2004 to 2011. The end of the Red Sox 86-year title drought. 2 titles. He's a good guy and a smart baseball man. He had players like David Ortiz, Manny Ramirez, Dustin Pedroia, Pedro Martinez, Curt Schilling. Then he got fired. Cleveland hired him, and now he's the current Cleveland Indians manager. And he got the Indians up 3-2 in the 2016 World Series. When I read this, I didn't know he lost the last 2. But anyway, he's a good guy. His secret is he cares about people. He said a funny thing after he got fired. Here he had broken the curse of Babe Ruth, ended the Red Sox 86-year title drought, won 2 World Series, and then got fired. Crazy. And he said, I guess I should have won 3 World Series. We're very blessed to have him here in Cleveland because he's a good guy, Terry Francona. The next book is The Rise and Fall of the Soviet Empire by Brian Crozier, 1999. This is a very interesting book. And the book chronicles the 20th century communist movement, the Russian Revolution, Eastern Europe, China, Asia, Africa, Latin America, how the Russians had people in every country promoting communism, their agenda. Vladimir Lenin, the first primary leader of the Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin, who is really the worst and served for a very long time, Nikita Khrushchev, who actually exposed Stalin, and eventually that led to the fall of the Soviet Union. Leonid Brezhnev, who was kind of like a re-Stalin guy. He wanted to re-Stalinize Russia. Yuri Andropov, this guy named Chernenko, and Mikhail Gorbachev, who was the last one. The Cold War, Mao Zedong, Ho Chi Minh, Fidel Castro, Korea, Vietnam, Cuba, Somalia, Ethiopia, Boris Yeltsin, who was the leader of Russia, independence for Latvia and the Russians, the Baltic states. The Russian scheming was endless. So this is a really important history for the 20th century. The whole, the Cold War that the United States fought against communism, which is such a seductive and attractive philosophy, and which was extremely popular at one time, and actually it still remains popular because of the suffering of the poor and idealistic people who want to believe that you can create an ideal society through government. But the reality is different. Ultimately, communism is not based on freedom. it's based on the lack of freedom, that the government having total control, and that's not good because freedom is a good thing, So it all sounds good, Well, the Russians were the first one. They became the Soviet Union in 1917, and then China in 1949, and then it looked like the whole world was headed on the road to communism. Eastern Europe, the Russians imposed communism on, and then the U.S. got involved in wars in Korea and Vietnam, trying to stop the spread of communism. And then, of course, Cuba in the Caribbean, which adopted it as well. And actually, it still is communist. Up till now, the countries that are communist are Cuba and North Korea. China has really changed a lot. It's kind of hard to say this, although it's still not a democratic country. Although it's hard to say that China is communist anymore because capitalism is very, influential there. There's economic freedom, but there's no political freedom in China. So this is a very interesting book, a very important topic. And he gets into the whole story all over the world, and in Africa as well. There were countries there that adopted communism, like Angola and Mozambique, Nicaragua in Central America, and then there were movements in other countries like El Salvador and communist movement in the Philippines. Up till now, there's a pretty powerful communist movement, and good people are attracted to it because it sounds good. People who care about the poor and who are idealistic and want a better world. But to me, it's just really it's really evil. This is how evil is. Evil is very seductive, and this is a good example of it in the political realm. The next book is Vietnam: A History: The First Complete Account of Vietnam at War by Stanley Carno, 1987. Book has 670 pages. It is a tremendous book. The author goes way back to ancient times, the French colonial period when Vietnam was a French colony. Finally, the U.S. war, which lasted until April of 1975. And he makes the case that the Vietnam War was hopeless from the beginning. There was no credible South Vietnamese government. Ho Chi Minh was a dedicated nationalist. Lyndon Johnson did not want to be accused of cowardice, so therefore he promoted the war. Henry Kissinger, the U.S. Secretary of State, calling for the American troop withdrawal, giving the American people salted peanuts. The more they got, the more they wanted, supposedly. Negotiations like the flicker of an eyelid in a Trollope novel. I thought that was a good line when they were negotiating in Paris with the U.S. with the North Vietnamese. Richard Nixon watched the movie Patton over and over to gain determination to try to win that war. Kissinger feared he'd lose his Harvard friends because of his involvement. The South Vietnamese politicians schemed for power and were corrupt. There was considerable Buddhist priest opposition to the pro-Catholic government in South Vietnam. It was impossible, the author argues, to save Vietnam from communism. We killed a lot of Vietnamese trying to help them. So this book is, against the war. I had a friend here in Rocky River, guy living down the hall from me. He moved out from Vietnam, and he had a different opinion, that what the U.S. tried to do was very good. He was from South Vietnam. And see, what people don't know, and this book doesn't talk about, is what happened after the U.S. left Vietnam. And I think, we're trying to do the right thing, and trying to stop communism in Vietnam from taking over the whole country, and we failed. And the guys who fought in Vietnam, I think, should be proud of what they did because we won the Cold War. It was a noble fight, and it was just very, very tough because we were trying to. The South Vietnamese government was not really credible politically, didn't have much support, and they weren't doing a good job. And of course, in the North, they were very ruthless. And Ho Chi Minh he was the leader. And this guy, my friend, he's a Vietnamese guy. He was from the South, and he grew up, I think, after the war. His father left. So many South Vietnamese had to leave the country because they were being mistreated after the war. Because the North Vietnamese says, well, we're going to punish you guys. There was so South Vietnamese were punished after the war, and so a lot of them left. You've heard stories of the boat people, thousands, hundreds of thousands who left. So it was something we tried to do. It was hard. It was very hard. But the war on communism was a very, very tough war. The Cold War was tough. This was probably the toughest example where we were trying to stop a political catastrophe from happening, but we just couldn't do it. There are limits to what you can do in life, and this is a very good example. But I still believe those who were involved in Vietnam, who served there, they did a good job. They tried to. You have to give people credit for effort, and it was a noble cause, because communism is a very evil, horrific type of government, which is very seductive and attractive. The next book is The Complete Life of Krishna, based on the earliest oral traditions and the sacred scriptures, by Mataji Devi Vanamali. Well, this is a wonderful book, the biography of Lord Krishna, the great saint of ancient India, who lived about 3000 BC, a life full of adventures, helping people achieve God union, the Battle of Kurukshetra. According to this book, 16,000 wives, Krishna omnipresent, joking with the milkmaids, healing the hunchback, enriching his destitute friend, advising Arjuna, one of the saints that we revere in Self-Realization Fellowship, Lord Krishna, who was very interesting because he was a king and a saint. And so you can't have anything better than that. You're going to have good government if you have a king who is a saint, and he was a saint. We believe this. It's kind of hard to study his life because it's so long ago, 3,000, it's almost 5,000 years ago, but I believe in him and all these interesting stories. One of them was a woman who was, she was a hunchback, and there was a guy who came into this town. It was a story in India, and she was selling. I think she sold perfume to Krishna, who was the king in this area. And there was this bad guy who came in to make trouble, and he wanted to buy her perfume from her. And so she was like, I'm sorry. Krishna had arrived and was going to fight this evil ruler, and he wanted to buy her perfume. Now, she was actually selling to the bad guy because that was her business. But she was devoted to Krishna, so she decided to, I'll sell it to you, and which actually was risky for her. And then he reached out his hand under her chin, and he applied pressure, and then her back straightened. It was a miracle. There are a lot of great, wonderful stories. There's a guy who was a friend of Krishna who he had no money and his things were bad, so he went to visit Krishna, and he forgot all about visiting him, and he was supposed to ask for money, and they had a good time. And he came. He was walking. It was like a 3-day walk, and he came home. He couldn't find his home because it was a big mansion, and then he realized, the whole point is that God will help us. We actually don't even have to ask God for the things we need, because he will help us regardless, because he loves us. So it's a wonderful book, and really enjoyed it. So anyway, it appears we're out of time. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Hope you find a good history book to read. There's so many out there. God bless you. Take care, and I'll see you next time.